So when we think about evolve, what does it actually mean? So I looked up the definition actually. So evolve means it's the human instinct for improvement. So as humans, our consciousness wants to make us develop things and discover things. So we can see that in two main fields that we have, like in human species, very particular to human species. For instance, is science, and one is the arts. This is not something you see in some of the other underdeveloped species. So we have this evolved consciousness. I'll give you an example. Newton, for instance, he observed the apple falling down, right? Or it fell on his head, depending on how the story goes. And then he wanted to discover why it happened. So other than, he wanted to discover why it happened other than just picking it up and eating it like, let's say, a monkey would do, or maybe even some humans, right? I wouldn't think too much about this. So there's this inner drive to improve things and get better facilities as human beings. However, there's a little problem there because we seek pleasure in a way that is much more than our bodies can provide. Let me say that again. We seek pleasure in a way much more than our bodies can provide. So there's this search for luxury all the time. So I'll take my personal example, the setting. I'm a little bit, I guess, probably more than 10 to 15 years elder to you all. I'm 37 years old. I've lived a comfortable life in a Western country. I was under the shelter of my parents, like many of you all. I had access to education, many facilities. I entered medicine actually at a very young age, around 18 years old, after I finished, here in Quebec, we call it CEGEP, which is like pre-university. And then I went to medical school at McGill. And then through my uni years, I just, there was always this kind of struggle between trying to fit in with my colleagues, my contemporaries, and then balancing what was my spiritual life. At some point, I made a decision to try to enjoy more material life, but I realized one thing, I kept failing at it. So there's an example, material life is like a sandwich bread. It's two pieces of bread, and you have happiness and distress, and in between, there's some kind of filling, right? So, but sometimes this sandwich doesn't have the filling, so the happiness is not there. So we struggle in life. We go from struggle to struggle, and there's no happiness at all. So this is kind of what's happening, and I'm sure many people can relate to this experience. I was reading the 10th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam the other day, and there was this one beautiful line. I want to share it with you. These are the pastimes of Akrura, who's the uncle of Krishna and Balaram, and he was coming to take them to Mathura from Vrindavan. So in the purport, Prabhupada writes, he says, the psychological underpinning of material life is the illusion that this world is somehow separate from God and therefore meant for our enjoyment. So what are we actually doing? In my case, materially, we go from one failure to another, but still there's this desire for so many comforts, to achieve wealth, power, fame, celebrity. And you can go down a list of like so many famous people's artists, painters, musicians, Hollywood actors, stars. And they have this pressure to remain successful, quote unquote, and to make it look effortless. this huge pressure on them. And what ends up happening when they put so much pressure on themselves from a material point of view is they ultimately fail and they get riddled with depression because they haven't really sought like that inner deep satisfaction, right? So I was just looking up some statistics to share with you guys. A few achievements that we did in modern medicine was very interesting. Like in the 20th century, you can say we did a very good job at fighting infectious disease. We're not doing a great job right now with COVID, but I mean, in general, like bacterial infections, things like that, things like smallpox, they got rid of all these these kind of diseases. And then in the last 20 years, modern science has really turned its head towards cancer. And we've created all kinds of new drugs for cancer. And we've made people live longer. It doesn't mean we make them live better, but we make them live longer necessarily. And then, so we've kind of taken care of some of those things. But now what is happening now is we see in this pandemic, a lot of people are struggling with mental illness. Regardless of even pandemic times, it's something that's considered the disease of the 21st century is loneliness and mental illness. So as per some statistics, there are close to 1 million people who commit suicide per year. Let's let that sink in for a second. 1 million people decide to end their lives. So in some ways, we are our own worst enemy. It's not terrorism. Okay, COVID is there now for maybe the next couple of years. But in the end, we're struggling against ourselves. So one person every 40 seconds decides to end their life, despite all these comforts, right? So we're comfortably distressed, but our mind is disturbed. So that's the problem. That's the obstacle. So it's not all doom and gloom. I'm not trying to paint that for you because, especially as aspiring devotees, we are full of hope and we have access to this wonderful Bhagavata knowledge, which can really cut through all the illusion. So we talked a little bit about the need to evolve, and we've done that on an external basis, right? So what is this evolution? Externally, we've done that, okay? Let's say it's too, like today it's almost minus 30 in Montreal. We're all sitting here at home and others are around the country and I'm sure it's quite cold, but you have heat, right? So you can adjust the temperature, you can adjust the thermostat. Or if it's too hot in the summer, you can put on the air conditioner, right? So those kinds of things we can mitigate, right? Those comforts. But what is evolution actually is talking about internal evolution, right? This is what our Goswamis are talking about, right? The internal evolution, the evolution of consciousness. I remember once, there's a nice quote by Martin Luther King. He says that we have guided missiles, but misguided men. So technology has brought us to such an incredible stage in human advancement, but we're just misguided. So what happens? We develop anxiety and depression. So when our mind goes into the past, what ends up happening is it invariably replays the negative, and that can lead to depression. If your mind goes too much into the future, then that can lead to anxiety. So somehow or other, our consciousness has to stay in the present. So we have so much, we are under this false impression sometimes that we have to control the internal as much as the external, right? So we actually expect more control than we have, and that causes a lot of frustration, and our we can't digest that. So there will be some failures in our life, but failure is an event. It doesn't mean that we are failures. Now we have to take up a process now that can cleanse this virus of the mind. When things don't work out the way we want to. So let's tackle a couple of things. Okay, this control issue that we have. Now say we can't control. What do we actually observe people doing when they can't control themselves? Their externals. At the extreme, what ends up happening is people sometimes get addicted to certain substances. And I see this a lot of the time in my practice. I take care of people with addictions, particularly to various substances, or on a subtle level, it's like you're addicted to certain kinds of entertainment, right? Like surfing the internet, or you can like spend hours sort of doing something maybe that's not as productive as you'd like it to be. And ultimately, if it gets very severe, very extreme, then people start thinking about ending their lives, right? Because they can't cope that they're not the controller, right? We do have some control of our lives, but it's not full control. What does that mean? That means, okay, let me give you an example. It could mean, let's say you're swimming, right, in a large body of water, and you can control like the direction where you're swimming. But if there's like some rocky waves that keep coming, right? Sometimes those waves pull you in another direction, right? And you have to learn how to tolerate that. But eventually those waves will subside and then you'll restart again. So you shouldn't give up. Doesn't mean we have to failures. We have to evolve in this situation by learning to let go a little bit. So sometimes when we're faced with some of these difficulties in life, a couple of things you can do with regards to helping you get past some of these issues is one, you can focus. Try to figure out what the exact problem is. Number two, ask yourself what you can do about it right now. Number three is the most important thing is you have to raise your consciousness, right? To a spiritual level. And that is through practice like meditation, mantra meditation, chanting Hare Krishna. And I guarantee you that experience will then give you a sense of security. We cannot solve problems on the platform of which they were created. This is Einstein, he said that, right? You have to do it on a different platform, right? So material problems require spiritual solutions. And then finally, you have to sort of release, let go of things that are not in your control. Sometimes the battles are lost, but not the war. We accept it and we move on in life. And we keep doing the best we can when bad things happen. So we talked a little bit about why we need to evolve. What are some of the problems of life that we're facing, especially diseases of the mind? And we're talking a little bit about how we can sort of solve those things. So let me take a big picture again for you guys and sort of put it in perspective. What are the real problems of life? You know, our situation is such that we're investing in a bank account that will give us no guaranteed return. That's kind of like a scary proposition, right? We are traveling in a boat with holes in it that's guaranteed to sink. And we're asking everybody to come step in our boat. So, okay, we're pampering our body so much. We're trying to satisfy every single desire, but this body gives us, again, the same things: disease, old age, and so many problems. So the whole world is functioning according to this idea. And we're still imagining success to be what gives maximal pleasure to the body. But if we can understand something about our real purpose, and our success is actually identifying as spiritual entities and acting on that platform. And so you understand what is your true identity, which is Sat Chit Ananda, right? To be always blissful. And you can't really be that happy through materialistic pursuits. Success should be long-lasting. It should be rooted in values, culture, eternal principles, and foundation of eternity. This is the greatest achievement and purpose of our life. We have to realize something very important for us. We should realize that this world is not our home. Recently, in ISKCON Montreal, the brahmacharis had started a Food for Life program because the government, with the pandemic restrictions and the curfew, said, okay, no more book distribution, no more Harinam. The devotees were very creative and they created the Food for Life program. And so one day, I went with some of the devotees and we served the homeless people in Montreal. And so one of the devotees was saying, I made a comment. I said, okay, it looks like really only homeless people here. And we thought maybe some regular people would come, but there's not that many people out on the streets. So one of the devotees remarked, he says, actually, we're actually all homeless because we're all away from Krishna. So that was very insightful. I think, yes, that's nice. We're all homeless because we're not in our original position. So I want to challenge you all with a purpose in life. Like if you don't have a goal, a slogan, which you can die for, if you don't have anything you can die for, then you don't have anything that you could live for, right? Think about that. If you don't have anything that you can die for, you don't have anything you can live for. I'll give you an example. Suppose you're faced with, you're caught up in an alley or something like that, like in the movies, right? Okay, there's 3, 4 big men. They're super muscular. They have like all these weapons, daggers, chains. They want to kill you. What are you going to do in that situation? Well, I think the logical thing to do is run away. 99% of the time, that's what's going to happen. But I'll give you a scenario where you might not run away. Suppose your mother was there behind you and they were ready to attack her. What will you do in that situation? Will you run away? I don't think so, because you're all trained nicely, you have good culture. No, you will fight, even if you have to leave your body, right? If situations in life are so difficult like this, you will stay and fight if you have something valuable behind you, right? Otherwise, you run away. So that's what Arjuna wanted to do, right? He was explaining all his doubts to the Supreme Lord. The whole Bhagavad Gita is question and answer. So many doubts that Arjuna is having. And ultimately, the Supreme Lord Sri Krishna says, Ma Suchaha, right? Ma Suchaha means do not fear. fight for me, fight for Krishna. So if you have Krishna in your lives, no matter how many obstacles there are, how many people are coming to attack you with weapons, we know that we have something worthy to fight for. So if you have Krishna and Krishna consciousness as the most valuable thing to defend, if that is behind you and most meaningful, no matter what comes, they say there's an expression, hell or high water, you'll be there to win it over. So, I'll give you one more example. For those of you who like reading Ramayana, there was one personality in Ramayana called, his name was Jatayu. He was the friend of Lord Ramachandra. He was a bird, like an eagle, like a very giant eagle, right? And when he saw Ravana flying away with Mother Sita, he went and tried to do something about it. But he was so old, actually, right? His vision was weak, so many things, right? He was a very old being, right? But he went and attacked Ravana, right? And he gave up his life. So you can say in one sense, yes, he failed, but he was actually victorious. And it was the Supreme Lord Sri Ram who went and performed his last rites. That was the perfection of his life. So we may go up through ups and downs in life, but if you have a meaningful goal, then you will always be successful, right? So this is what I want to challenge you all, is find something that you can die for. And I hope that is Srila Prabhupada's movement. So that's something I wanted to share with you all today. Maybe we could open it up for maybe some reflections or questions, and I can elaborate on some points as you like.
Yeah, I think we have some questions that have come in. There's a question that's come in through the chat, and then there's also some questions that have come in through the anonymous form. So, Shruti, whenever you're ready, you can unmute and ask.
Hi, Bol, everyone. Hi, Bol Prabhu. So yeah, we have some questions that have come in, and the first one is, what are some indications that you are evolving amongst adversity in your life? Sometimes I feel like I'm running in circles rather than evolving and growing through life situations.
Okay, so I'm just going to repeat the question if I understood correctly. So how can we understand that we are evolving in life, and it does feel like sometimes we are going in a circular pattern? Okay. So it all depends. If you're talking about a material issue, from a material perspective, it's very clear, right? If your goal is to get a better job, if your goal is to, earn more money, you can clearly assess that like objectively, right? Your salary is increasing, you're getting all these things. So that's one aspect. So that's the external aspect. From a spiritual aspect, it is very important to gauge this by discussing these kind of things with your mentors and your gurus in life. So you may have many Shiksha gurus in life, and you need to undergo a process of evaluation, right? Meaning you need somebody who's objective, looking at your life and trying to help you point out what the problem areas are, right? So let's say, like, for example, if a devotee I see is chanting 2 rounds, right? And I come back later and he's chanting 1 round, right, after 6 months, then you can see that he's not evolving, right? It's like seeing a child who's in grade 2, but he doesn't, after 3 years, he's still in grade 2. He's not in grade 3 or grade 4. Right? So there has to be, we have to then seek shelter of our mentors so they can ignite a fire inside us. We increase the intensity of our practice, right? So what does it mean to increase the intensity of your spiritual practice? It means you're counting things. The Goswamis, they were counting everything. How many times they chanted on beads? I don't know, 300,000 names per day. How many times they're offering obeisances to Govardhan? They would count how many times they were doing all these things. They kept track of everything to set us a nice example. So try to track yourself somehow. And look, you're not in this alone. That's the way I see it, right? Being in Krishna consciousness means you have a family who's here to take care of you, here to protect you, bring you closer to Krishna, right? So when you feel like you're stuck, then I would like to, just try to step back a little bit, try to get a little bit of perspective, and go deep into Srila Prabhupada's books and invest your time in japa. These are the things that I do personally when I'm a little bit, when I start ruminating in my mind and then going down like a bit of a spiral. Is that all right?
Yeah, I think so. And then there is one in the chat that says, how do you adopt value and believe in it every day? How do we prove it to ourselves?
Okay. How do we adopt value and believe it every day? How do we prove it to yourself? Personal, physical, and professional. Okay. Personal, physical, and professional. Okay. I think we talked a little bit, touched a bit about this, right? Look, everybody has some kind of core values, I think. We talk about that. Some people can value different things in their life. Fundamental values, I think, for a devotee, I think, are one, we should compare ourselves to who we were the previous day. That's what Bhaktivinoda Thakur says. Don't compare yourselves to outside too much. That's kind of a negative way of thinking. And then how do we then kind of make it so important to us? I think you gotta think about it from a question of drive, right? What do we want to be at the end of all this, right? Like, what do you want your legacy to be, right? How do you want to be remembered? If you ask yourself this question, then you start cultivating some qualities that you think are important, like compassion, kindness. These are like good quality kind of values you want to bring in your life. How you're interacting with other people. When you get squeezed in life, what comes out of you? When you squeeze oranges, what comes out? It's usually orange juice, right? Something not nice. But when we get squeezed, what comes out? Usually when we get squeezed, if we're not mature, many vile things come out. Blood, pus, so many things, right? So the way you can adopt these values and make it your life goal, I think, is having full faith in our loving superiors. Let me repeat that. Having full faith in our loving superiors. Okay. Keep this as like a mantra in your life. Because our gurus, they care so much about us, right? Srila Prabhupada, he left Radha Damodar Temple. He spent 10 years, Radha Damodar Temple came to America. He left Vrindavan for like this godforsaken place. He went to the Lower East Side of Manhattan, right? It was so dangerous back then, right? That's not like some hipster place now, like maybe how it is now, but it was so dangerous. This is like, Paramahamsa Vaishnava coming to like hell and delivering all these souls. What a beautiful sacrifice. Some people, Prabhupada was asked once, why, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he could have done that himself. Why didn't he do it? Prabhupada gave a nice answer. He said, well, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu wanted me to have the credit for doing it. That's all. But he became an instrument of the Lord's compassion. So, this is Prabhupada's example. So if we can surrender ourselves to a loving superior like Srila Prabhupada and Srila Prabhupada's, disciples, there's so many saints within our society. You can list them left, right, and center, right? These people have dedicated their whole lives to Krishna consciousness. Look, material life is a life of exploitation. Spiritual life is a life of dedication. Material life of exploitation. What can you do for me? What can I get from you? Spiritual life is life of dedication, life of service, right? So if we can then surrender to these loving superiors, follow their instructions, then we're safe. We're safe. And I feel like we have a lot of good examples that we can follow of people who have invested their whole life in serving Srila Prabhupada and their respective gurus.
Thank you, Prabhu. So now I think we can open up for discussion. So if anyone has any questions to ask or anything to contribute, please go ahead. Please feel free to do so.
Thank you so much, Charith Prabhu. I guess I'll kick things off. Just wanted to go further into your last point that you mentioned. Sometimes, and I'm just speaking for myself, it just feels a little utopian, to be honest, to be able to implement spiritual values, while we go about our day-to-day life. We are not dealing with devotees when we go to work or when we're in school. And as you gave your example at the beginning of the class, that you were also, in an environment when you were in medical school where, all these external forces were influencing you. So, and that really, when you talk about this material life is a life of exploitation, it really is. And sometimes, maybe it is an illusion or it isn't, but you sort of get into the psyche that if I do not also apply these techniques of exploitation, then I might not get, what I'm after, and I'll just be left behind in the rat race. And then how am I supposed to practice my spiritual life if career-wise or school-wise I don't have, I don't have the facilities to have a roof over my head or food on the plate? So how do we sort of get away from this, where we are successful materially, contesting with the life of exploitation, and yet be able to stay grounded and almost like very determined and dedicated to following our spiritual values?
Okay, that's a very nice question actually. So how do we? There's a couple of things you said in what you were asking. You said one is how do we, maybe I'm dissecting it a little differently. How do we compete without competing? Maybe that's one thing that kind of comes to mind. How do we stay grounded? And also there's an element of how do we balance things, right? Correct? Okay. So how do we compete with in a world of exploitation? Well, Srila Prabhupada gave a wonderful example. Okay. He, Srila Prabhupada's life, right? He was a pharmacist, right? Before he was always, pure Vaishnava from birth, right? He was worshiping deities. He was born in Vaishnava family, right? So he like, the ideal life. But at some point, his business actually became successful, I think, in Prayag, right? He had something called Prayag Pharmacies. And at some point, he was able to maintain his family very nicely, right? And he balanced his spiritual life at the same time. Srila Prabhupada's example was when he was a householder, he was chanting 16 rounds per day. He would chant 4 rounds in the morning, right? When he woke up, 4 rounds after breakfast, 4 rounds before lunch, and 4 rounds around dinner time, right? So he balanced it all. So that kind of answers maybe a little bit on the balance side. We have to keep Krishna always there. When we're chanting, at least he's in the forefront, and then when we're doing other activities, he's sort of in the background. We have to dovetail some of our activities. So when you're looking, let's say, at a career option, try to find something that's in the mode of goodness. That's what I would suggest. Where you can make a difference in people's lives. So I think that's one aspect, right? And it doesn't mean you have to become like, I don't know, I'm not saying you have to go to Africa and like feed the children or something like this. I'm talking about like, even practical things. If you're like an engineer or you're in business, for instance, right? Invest yourself nicely in that product that you're making or contributing to society to make things better for people. So do your work nicely, because Prabhupada said the devotee means he has to be daksha. You know what daksha means? Daksha means he has to do everything very nicely, right? It's nice, huh? Prabhupada gave the example, and he gave this example in the context of his temple managers. He didn't even want 1 cent wasted, right? Not even 1 cent he wanted wasted, right? Everything he would say, pakka, that everything had to be the counting had to be done very nicely. Everything had to be used for Krishna's service. Everything. The Prabhupada gave a nice example of it as being daksha. So if you're in family life, take care of your children nicely. In your youth now, you also at some point you're going to have to start thinking about your elderly parents as they're growing older and trying to care for them. So you have to somehow balance all these things. And when we're feeling a little bit weak in our sadhana, then my suggestion for you is you must, seek out nice sadhu sangha, right? Be with the devotees, right? Associate with them. I know it's difficult now with this pandemic, but you're doing the nice thing. You're meeting online and things like that. In Montreal, we started the Gita classes, I think, to Radhika Nabe's desire to read Bhagavad Gita since last March. We're doing almost, I guess, 10 months now, weekly reading of Bhagavad Gita. And it's helpful for everybody. So sadhu sangha, very important, like association, which just strengthens us. Because if we're around people who are practicing what we want to become good at, then we'll also follow in their footsteps, right? Right. So that's my suggestion for that. Did I touch all the points on the Madhava Prabhu?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, just to make sure I have it right, it's just like, um, still do it in that spirit, but instead of doing it in a way for ourselves, do it as a way, um, you know, we want to have it nice for Krishna. Like, as you said, have that mood that I want to be perfect, not for myself, but I want to do it, as you said, like, even, I think we can even take it one step further and say that I want to do it because these were the instructions of Srila Prabhupada, and this is what I want to be Daksha in that sense.
Yeah, I remember once Gopal Krishna Maharaj, he spoke to me. He said, look, I was expressing some desire. I was like a little bit not so disenchanted about my medical practice, for instance. I've been doing it for 8 years. I'm a specialist in internal medicine, critical care, so I take care of very sick people. I was a bit over it, at some point, like, it's the same thing over and over again. I just didn't feel like I was making a difference sometimes, right? Okay, I make people live longer, I prolong their suffering, you get down on yourself sometimes. But Maharaj, he told me, he says, look, this is a very nice thing. Every time he comes to Montreal, he calls me up. He calls me on my cell phone. I feel like, wow, Maharaj cares so much. Why is he calling me? I'm like nobody, Just come, Charith. I want to see you. I have something. And he engages me in some kind of service, something or other. And he always encourages me. He says, okay. Then I realize, okay. He's like, Charith, can you take a look at my leg? Or I have this issue here. He just wants to like engage me somehow. Then I say, oh wow, I know why I did all this training for, and things like that. So somehow or the other, we can help devotees. And I mean, in medicine, sometimes some of the most meaningful things in medicine are, for me, are helping take care of devotees sometimes, right? Because not only now I don't feel like, oh, I'm just doctor of material body. I'm like, oh wow, I'm like doctor, but like Vaishnava doctor. Wow, that feels very nice. So add Vaishnava to whatever it is your profession is, right? Okay, you're an engineer, you're a Vaishnava engineer. Okay, you're a nurse, you're a Vaishnava nurse. Wow, like it can really like change your culture a little bit and attitude toward what you're doing. And you create a great example, right? Because your like good behavior is like your best example for preaching, right? Vaishnava marketer, yeah, like that. Maybe you got to sell some things that people can enhance their spiritual lives sometimes, right? But for the most part, you're all like trying to cultivate some kind of professions and things that are not like grossly sinful, right? Like you guys aren't like butchers or something like that, right? Or like working in a casino, right? So grossly, they're not so sinful, right? These kinds of things, because they're not like so negative that they're pulling you away from Krishna. You're going to have a decent job because you need to live, right? Right? And we're not bums. We are like upstanding citizens, right? In society as much as we can be, right? So yeah, so Maharaj inspired me like that and kind of encourages me in things. I mean, my personal example, I'm extremely, some people would say I'm very ambitious. And I'm not as humble as I could be. After medical school, I got bored. I didn't know what to do. So 8 years of practice, 8 years of practice, I went back to school and I've completed an MBA for some reason. I don't know why. Because I just needed something to do, right? And so No, I'm using it in a way. It helps me in certain aspects of management with our temple. We have a farm project here. And it opened a lot of doors for me. So, I mean, I believe in education. So that was the right thing for me to do at the time. And it opened up like different doors for me in terms of career path and things like that. So there's not, I mean, you should take guidance when you're making these kinds of life decisions, I think. But I think there's nothing wrong with being materially successful in a sense, right? You don't think you have to feel bad about yourself if you're able to feed yourself nicely and take care of your family and your loved ones. I don't think there's anything negative like that. If we start increasing our comforts too much to the point where we're forgetting Krishna, then you have to evaluate yourself a little bit, reassess yourself a little bit, right? Isn't it? I'm not asking you to live like a Goswami, right? Right? I don't think even Srila Prabhupada did, although Srila Prabhupada wanted some of his disciples to live like Goswamis, and maybe you can look at the example of Sripad Aindra Prabhu, like he lived like Goswami in Vrindavan, you know. So there's some unique Vaishnavas like that. But you don't have the pressure of being a sannyasi, right? Being a sannyasi, think about it. Every single, even slight fault or error is magnified to the extreme. The whole society will know something. Oh, they did like this. Oh, they did like that. You know how much pressure that is? So we are not in that situation, right? We're just rank and file soldiers, right? We follow instructions, and Prabhupada takes us back to Krishna. So I think we have it pretty good. I mean, you know, most of you all will become grahastas and have nice family lives. So you know, I don't know. I don't. You know, what is the difficulty, as Prabhupada would say sometimes. Somebody asked about the farm in Montreal. Yeah, it's just north of Montreal. It's just 30 minutes. So this is a project spearheaded by His Grace Anubhava Das, our temple president here. So it's called Nandagram. So it's a nice project. Slowly but surely, we're trying to do something.
So, Prabhu, I have a question for you. So, do you have a personal motto for your spiritual life?
Personal motto for spiritual life. Okay. I do. I'm not necessarily living it though, but I want to be honest with you guys. The Paribhasha Sutra for Gaudiya Vaishnavas. Okay, Paribhasha Sutra means the how can I explain this in English? It's like the heavy mantra or like guiding light for Gaudiya Vaishnavas, right? Is the following. Trinad api suni chena taror api saishna. Amanina manadena kirtaniya sadaharihi. This is like the fourth mantra of the Shikshashtakam prayers of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So what does it mean? As you, how can I explain this? Let me think about this for a second. So this mantra is talking about humility, right? You have to understand one principle as Vaishnavas, Gaudiya Vaishnavas, especially the higher you go, the more you think everybody is better than you. The higher you go, the more you think everybody else is better than you. So you become more humble, right? The more I learn in medicine, the more I realize I don't know anything. Right? The more I go into these Shastras, Prabhupada's books, I realize I don't know anything. Right? So there's that humility aspect. So we are trying to go up. But regular people like karmis, what's happening to them is the lower they go, right? The more they think they are better than everybody else. The lower they go, the more they think they're better than everybody else. Correct? So I think this is a great example. So how can we, what is one quality that we all have to develop is actually we have to develop humility. So the world has already taught me how to be bold, confident, get what I want. Every man for themselves. That's what this world is teaching us, correct? I don't think that's lacking in terms of messaging we're seeing in the society, right? All right, eat, drink, be merry, that kind of thing. But for us, Paribhasha Sutra is Trinadapi Sunita. So ask yourself this question: how do you know if you are humble? Okay, number one, like self-evaluation question is: do you feel joy and happiness when you see other Vaishnavas advancing and being glorified? Think about this. Do you feel happiness when you see let's say, if Radhika sees Abe singing beautiful kirtan, does she feel happy? I know she does. But I know they have some internal competition between the two of them also. Right? But like, to give you an example, right? So you hear somebody singing nice in the temple, but if your first reflection is, oh, why am I not singing? Why am I not singing? I don't know, what is it? We don't even have Sunday feast, but Sunday 8 o'clock arti, you know, it's like prominent thing, right? You know, because everybody's seeing you sing, right? So if you're thinking or seeing somebody, you know, cooking very nicely or some other activity accelerating their career, if you're having envy in that situation, then reevaluate yourself, right? That's one thing. All right. Number two. So number one is, do you feel happiness if you see other friends, Vaishnavas, family advancing? Number two, are you willing to go and seek correction from Vaishnavas? Are you willing to go and seek correction from Vaishnavas? What does that really mean? How do you accept feedback? How do you accept feedback? Because a lot of people, when I give feedback, I have students, right? And I always ask them this question. I ask them, how do you want to get feedback? How do you want to be corrected? They have no idea because, unfortunately, I don't know which generation it is, XYZ, I don't know. Anyways, this is a generation I see a lot of what I call it the participation medal generation. You know this term? Participation medal generation. Like you go play a soccer game and you get a medal even though you lost at the end of the game because you showed up. So we're so used to being praised and glorified, and we cannot accept feedback and we get defensive. So think about the Lord's example. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, one time he was criticized by one person. His name was Ramachandra Puri. You might know this pastime. He criticized the eating habits of the Supreme Lord. Can you believe it, right? He criticized, he was observing, oh, there was too many ants where Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was sitting. So he understood, oh, he must be overeating. He's eating too many sweets, right? And all the devotees became very upset, you know, all his like close associates, they wanted to like wring this person's neck, you know, they're willing to fight. But you know what Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he said, he thought about it and he said, yes. He accepted it, actually says, yes. as a sannyasi, I must control my eating, right? He showed the example, even though that person, there was no fault in the Supreme Lord, obviously. But he showed the example because a sannyasi, has to be paka. Everybody knows there's a fault. The whole world knows about it, right? At the same time, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu also gave proper instruction, right? When Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he met Sanatana Goswami in, I don't know, first, I think, Ramakeli, I think, something like this. Sanatana Goswami looked like a beggar, right? He had come and then he had like a long beard because he was working for the Nawab Hussein Shah and everything, and his name was forgot the names that they kept. Something Malik, right? He had some name like that, right? Like some kind of Muslim kind of name that was given to him. So he came there and he was like a beggar. And then Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was with his intimate associates. And then he called Chandrasekhar Acharya and he said, go outside. There's an elevated Vaishnava outside. Go bring him to me. And then Chandrasekhar Acharya goes outside. He doesn't see anybody who looks like a Vaishnava. He goes back in. He says, I just saw this beggar there. He looks like a homeless person. I don't know. We didn't see any Vaishnava outside. And the Lord says, bring that person to me. I want to see him. That's the elevated Vaishnava I want to see. And Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he saw him. And then he was looking at him, didn't say anything. The Lord looked directly. Sanatana Goswami, on his way to meet the Lord, he met his brother-in-law, Srikanta, and he gave him a chadar to wear, right, around his shoulders. And that chadar was very opulent, right? Extremely opulent. And he's a beggar practically now. Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu started looking at that chadar, didn't say anything. Sanatana Goswami went to the nearby river. He left the place immediately, went to the river, saw one beggar there or some mendicant type of person. He said, okay, you give me your torn cloth, I'll give you my other fancy one, right? And obviously that's a good exchange for that person. When he came back, Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was very pleased with him. He was very happy. So he says, look, my dear Sanatan, he says, look, my duty is to correct you and make sure you have no tinge of material desire left, right? So he says like this, a doctor must cure disease in such a way that it will never return. That is a real doctor. Doctor must cure disease in such a way that it will never return. That's what our gurus are, right? That's what Srila Prabhupada is. They're the real doctors because they're curing our disease of material life. So you can see how Sanatana Goswami accepted Lord Chaitanya's instruction submissively and with all his heart. And so this is what I wanted to show you guys, demonstrate, we have to be a little bit, learn to develop humility and service to the Vaishnavas and respect for what they have to tell us. It is better for us to take that humble mood, I think. Humility can also mean boldly doing something for Srila Prabhupada. He instructed Tamal Krishna Goswami like this also. Boldly doing something for the Guru. So both aspects are very important. Is that helpful?
Yes. So we'd like to thank Charith Prabhu for joining us today on our bi-weekly sanghas. And everyone, thank you for joining us.